In this video, I'm going to look at putting together a warband for new edition Warcry. In this example, I'm going to be dusting off my Untamed Beasts warband from the original box, but the lessons will apply for any warbands you care to make. During the video, I'm also going to talk a little bit about what I think are the missing components for Warcry. My first few games of Warcry were awesome. I had all the fighters and abilities right there in front of me. As I got stuck into the campaign and expanded out my forces though, keeping track of things became a little harder. I often forgot a fighter, had an artifact, or an injury. Recently, GW released Bladeborn. This was a limited release, only available in some shops like Target. It's part of a line of introductory games, and this one played like Warcry in the hex grid. What was notable about this was the inclusion of cards for certain things like lesser artifacts. As we go through this, I'm going to talk about some of the cards that you could use. I've included a link to the ones I show on screen in the notes, but you can make your own versions using the Warcry card generator, which now has an object tab for situations just like this. Alright, let's get back to making a list. First off, we pick one of the Grand Alliances. In reality, you'll skip straight to the actual faction you want, but the Grand Alliance your warband is part of influences the options you have. If you're picking out a new warband and you already have a lot of death models, then picking a new death warband might be a good idea. Here we're going for Chaos, and in particular the Untamed Beasts faction. As we'll later see, some of the models from the other Chaos warbands will be usable. With the Warband Faction selected, we now know our ability list. Having the cards with all the abilities is super handy. In this case, I could use my old Untamed Beasts and Universal abilities. As I understand it, only minor wording clarifications were made, so nothing functional. The reactions, however, are brand new. On the cards in the new box, the Warband reaction is on the back of the card. Here, I've made a new card with the Untamed Beast reaction and all of the universal reactions together. I did cheat a little, and I edited the image after using the Creator tool to remove the extra Untamed Beast symbols. Next up, we start assembling our force. There are two ways of playing: match play and narrative. First, we'll put together a match play warband, and we'll look at narrative play later. To build your warband, you have 1000 points. Each fighter costs a certain number of points. We don't have to worry about weapons or gear options, as each fighter already comes armed and ready to go. At minimum, you must have 3 fighters with a maximum of 15. You must have 1 leader. That's a fighter with the hero trait from your faction. So in this case, Untamed Beasts. You can have another 2 heroes, up to 3 Thralls, and at most 1 monster. Everyone else is a fighter that comes from our faction. For the Untamed Beasts, and for most of the warbands made specifically Warcry, there's only 1 leader option, the Heart Eater. Many of the classic Age of Sigmar factions have a wide range of leader options. Pull up those PDFs and look for the hero rune mark and you'll see the available options. The leader doesn't offer any particular bonuses. He doesn't give you tactic points or boost nearby units' morale or anything like that. So you can take a weak leader to open up points options, but your leader is one of your limited hero options, so more often than not it'll be one of your best fighters. In addition, your opponent is incentivized to try kill your leader, so having a dangerous, tough leader is good. The bulk of your warband will be made from non-hero fighters from the faction list. In this case, I've got everything out of the box, which GW have kindly balanced, so it adds up to exactly 1000 points. Although these models are monopose, I'm not limited to just one of each. I could spend all of my points on multiple First Fangs if I wanted to. And often, multiple of the best fighter is a great approach. Everything does cost points though, and for each First Fang I can have 2 Plains Runners, and having lots of models lets me cover more of the board for objectives and control the pace of the game with more activations. So it's a bit of a balance. You can have at most 3 fighters with a hero rune mark. Your leader will be 1, so you have room for 2 more. In the Untamed Beast faction, there's only 1 hero option, the Heart Eater, so I could take another 2 Heart Eaters. With other faction warbands, there are more hero characters, so you have more options to choose from. Alternatively, you can take allies. Now there are 2 types of allies. First is a leader from another faction within your Grand Line. In this case, we have a Dark Oath War Queen, who is from the Slaves of Darkness faction, and that is in the Chaos Grand Alliance. When she joins my warband, she keeps all her Slaves of Darkness abilities, so we add an extra ability card of stuff just for her. Rather than the full list, I've only included the abilities she can use herself. We could pick any fighter with a hero rune mark from any Chaos faction, so there's a lot of options there. Next up are the allies. These essentially are Chaos heroes that are not a part of any warband. They have their own special list of abilities, so again we get another card, and in this case I've picked the Ogroid Myrmidon, mostly because I love the model. Next up we have Thralls. These are essentially fighters that anyone in the Grand Alliance can use. They're limited to just 3, but they don't tie up your hero slots. They have their own list of abilities that are quite limited. Notably, the voice of the master ability makes them great for protecting your leader. I picked a Fury here, as I have the model, and Flight can be very useful for objectives. As Thralls can be picked by any warband of the Grand Alliance they are in, they typically are worse than fighters within a faction, but they do add some options that might not be otherwise available. Monsters are the super big guys. In the last edition, they were only something you would see in campaigns, but now they're an option in match play. They work a little differently, and as they take damage, they get slower and do less damage. They are still super expensive and take up one of your 3 deployment slots, shield, dagger, or hammer, all by themselves. There's 2 ways you could make this work with the card. Either make multiple cards, one for each level of damage, or alternatively just use the section under the name to write a summary. So typically, for every 10 damage, it'll be -2 move, -1 hit, and -2 crit, or something like that. Monsters can only take 1 action when they activate, but they can be activated up to 3 times per turn. They cannot take university abilities, but they do have a list of monster-only abilities, and they give your opponent a list of monster hunting abilities. So again, we've put together another card just to keep all of those handy. I don't have any monster models in my collection, so this image is from GW. Chimera seems to be a good choice as it can fly, so it can get where you need it. After looking at all these options, we've got an extra 925 points of fighters, and we already had 1000 points. So if we want to include these options, we're going to have to drop some fighters. So let's play around a little. This first list, we're going to try to get the Chimera in. So we always start with leader. Adding in the Chimera brings us to 590 points straight away. I'm a little worried about numbers of fighters, so I'll add in our cheapest option, which is the Planesrunner next. That leaves 245 points, which I'll spend on a Prey Taker and First Fang to finish this up. That's 985 points, so not 100% efficient. There's a little bit of room in those 15 points to kind of play things around. Alright, next up, let's look at the heroes. So again, we're going to start with the Heart Eater as leader. We'll add in the 2 heroes that we previously picked out, and we're up to 640 points. Keep the intense killing going, I'm going to add in the Rock Tusk Prowler and the Beast Speaker, which are kind of a paired set. This leaves us with 55 points, just enough for a token Planesrunner. Only 6 models, but 4 of them are pretty terrifying. One last one for fun. Again, we'll start with the Heart Eater. This is to be a beast focused list, so we'll add a Rock Tusk and Beast Stalker. In this case, we're going to add 3 Thralls, 2 of the big Razor Gores, and a Chaos Warhound to round out the numbers. Will this be good? I doubt it, but it sure looks fun. Once you've finalized your warband, it's a good idea to consider how to split it into 3 battle groups. They should be spread as evenly as possible, so if you have 7 fighters, 2 of the groups will have 2 fighters and the last will have 3 fighters. If you have a monster, then it takes up a group all by itself and remaining fighters get split between the other 2. You should be trying to keep any fighters that you want working together, so the Prowler and the Beast Stalker should be in the same group. Strictly, you decide the groups just before you deal the terrain, deployment, victory, and twist cards. So you won't know what will be dealt, but you should have an idea what's in the decks. The old decks would favour shield, putting it in reserve the least. The new decks are more balanced, with all the groups having an equal time of being in reserve. The major difference seems to be how close to the centre of the board they deploy, with dagger on average closest, followed by shield and hammer furthest, and how flexible that deployment is, whether it's a board edge or a specific point. In this case, dagger has it best, followed by hammer, then shield. The recommendation then is to put your hard hitters, especially anyone slow, in the dagger. They'll be more often in the centre. Your fastest or ranged fighters in the hammer, they'll be furthest away, so it'll take them a while to get there, and then the remainder in the shield. In this case, I've spread my Planesrunners evenly. My leader and First Fang go in the dagger for the biggest punch. My Prowler and Beast Stalker go in the hammer, where hopefully they will be fast enough to get back in position, and then the remainder, the 2 Prey Takers, go into the hammer. If you're playing in a tournament though, you might have pre-prepared deployments. If you're playing one of the campaigns from the book, you do actually know the battle already. So you can tailor your battle groups specifically for the fight, and if you're the attacker, you'll even get to see your opponent's battle groups before you select your own. Personally, I feel it's important to play what's fun, but I always appreciate that a competitive game between 2 powerful warbands is also fun. And it's also important to understand what is strong, so you don't accidentally set up a mismatch between a strong and a weak warband. From the first edition of Warcry, the common pillars for a strong team relied on 3 elements. Fast fighters, so lots of games are won by objectives, and getting where you need to is important. This is also key for flying force. A model that can one-shot a fighter isn't very good if it actually can't reach anyone all game. Second, cheap fighters, sometimes called chaff. These do a few different things. First, they give you more activations, which can be useful. Second, they project force, like fast movement, but if you have enough fighters spread out, one of them will already be there when you need them. Lastly, cheap fighters let you spend more on other fighters without sacrificing your numbers. Speaking of which, the last section is sometimes called a dragon, because typically these were fast, flying, and could quickly kill a target. These are problem solvers. They should be able to get to wherever the problem is and permanently solve it. The Chimera in this picture is probably a bad example of that though, as the preferred dragons of the last editions were significantly cheaper. That said, we haven't really seen monsters on the board, and as monsters go, the Chimera, which can fly, is pretty nice. Okay, that was a ton of stuff for match play, but what about narrative play? Warcry seems to have been designed for narrative play with huge parts of the book dedicated to it. I've heard mixed stories about whether people preferred match or narrative, but personally I've loved playing chain of narrative games with a friend, letting them level up the warband over those games and really getting attached to it. Starting warband in narrative is a lot like match but with less options. You still have 1000 points, you have to have a leader, and you must have between 3 and 15 hydrogen total. All the extra hero, troll and monster options are gone. The same limitations are there, like only one monster, but you need to unlock the options during campaign rather than having them available straight away. For our Untamed Beasts, that means we take everything out of the core box and we're done. Arguably, we could get a second box and fine-tune some selections. Indeed, if you're just getting started with the Untamed Beasts, the only option you have is to get the Age of Sigmar box, which has double the models of the original Warcry box. It's about the same price, but it doesn't come with cards, which isn't the problem since the cards are out of date anyway. As a bonus, because this is narrative play, you get to pick a heroic trait for your leader from a list of universal heroic traits. This is a big boost for your leader, and if you have leader options, you should start thinking about how those options interact with the traits. Here is a good case where printing out these cards will help you remember the trait in a fight. When you build your warband, you also start with a quest. Quests in 1st edition were big long affairs. In this edition they're much smaller and can often be achieved in a single battle. Don't want to get too hung up on a system, but the core of it is you get glory, then you'll get opportunities to spend glory. If you want a new hero or troll, you complete the Secure a Powerful Ally quest. If you want a monster, you complete the Hunt the Beast quest. Remember, your point limit is still 1000, so if you wanted to add more fighters straight away, you'd have to drop some of your existing ones. You can increase this limit if you move to a better encampment, but to do so you need to gather some glory and get lucky on exploration rolls at the end of battle. So my recommendation will be to start with the Fight for Glory quest, which will give you an extra glory each time you take down a fighter. The last thing to talk about is the aftermath phase of each battle. So certain things will happen. First, you'll get more glory. Second, you'll work out injuries for your fighters who are taken down. This can range from death to absolutely fine, with a bunch of injuries in between. These injuries will stick around until the fighter succeeds at a recovery roll, which happens at the end of a battle, so having some cards to keep track of them can be really useful. Similarly, during the end phase, any of your fighters that were not taken down can make a Renown roll. If they roll a 6, they gain a point of Renown up to a max of 3. This will let them take a reaction without costing an action once per battle. Again, it can be super useful to have mini cards to remind you during the game, removing it or turning it upside down when used. In a similar vein, fighters will end up with artifacts as the campaign goes on. Having cards keep track of these really helps during the game, especially later in the campaign when you end up with a ton of different moving parts. Alright, I think that's everything. Warcry is a really great game where you can have a lot of fun. Even warbands like the Untamed Beasts, who have a limited selection of fighters, are able to recruit those extra 2 heroes from other warbands in the Grand Alliance, which gives you a ton of options. Personally, I think you can have the most fun with thematic and character-driven warbands. So name those fighters, pick some models that look cool, and enjoy the slaughter. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and comment.